Okay, let's begin. Just start by dropping down into your body and noticing its condition. What's going on there? And especially tuning into the area of the heart, the middle of the chest. Whatever you find, whatever is active for you, just allow that to be. And in the midst of that, give rise to a heart wish to benefit yourself in some way. What is a gift that you would like to give to yourself? And allow that felt sense to be a starting point for a universal altruistic wish, a wish to benefit all beings. And taking a step further, that this wish to benefit all beings becomes authentic bodhicitta, which is the wish not only for universal benefit, but also the awakening of all beings. So in whatever way that registers, may we awaken in order to help all beings awaken and be benefited. And simply allow that wish to mix a space, letting go. And simply resting. Now let's take a few deliberate deep breaths. So breathing in with the belly, the chest and upper chest. And exhaling fully from the top down. 3 times. Now as we breathe in again, filling completely, exhaling, and just dropping our left shoulder in the direction of our right knee, exhaling and twisting. Breathing in, coming back to center, exhaling in the other direction. Breathing and moving 3 times to each side. Really integrating the breath in the body. And as we rest, allowing awareness to gently spread and pervade throughout the body. For the next movement, with our hands on our hips, breathing in, exhaling and twisting, inhaling, coming back to center, and exhaling in the other direction. Three times to each side. Just really allowing awareness to pervade the body. Relaxing with the out-breath. Again, hands on the hips, breathing in. This time exhaling and leading to the side. Stretching from the hip through the neck. Again, 3 times to each side. last movement with our hands on our knees, breathing in and arching back. And exhaling and curling forward. Three times. We're going to revisit the space of the heart again. And do so just by inviting our breath into that region. Breathing in and feeling. As we breathe out, just allowing space around the heart, this region in the center of our chest, at the level of our heart. Breathing in and sensing. With curiosity, but also gentleness. And breathing out with a sense of acceptance and space. Now let's start to explore the dimensions of the heart. So feel what it's like now to breathe in through the back. Breathing in and sensing the back portion of the heart. As you breathe out, extend the felt sense of the heart backwards. As if through a door or window to the rear, through which the breath comes and goes. And just notice what that brings up. Sensation, texture, or feeling tone. Now move to the right side, breathing in and out through the right side of the heart. Again, the in-breath brings a sense of curiosity and caring attention. And the out-breath, allowing space and accepting whatever's arising. Now shifting to the left side. Noticing any difference as you tune in and breathe. Our job is to simply stay present to whatever is arising as we breathe with the heart. And now open the heart panoramically, breathing with all sides, below and above. So whatever is arising, whether it is sharp or smooth, clear or numb, if there's longing, if there's agitation, if there's warmth, see if you can give a name or many names to what is arising in this felt sense of the heart. And simply continue to breathe and feel. Allowing space for the heart to speak. And try to find the most salient aspect of this felt sense. And if there is blankness or numbness, just look directly at that. Feel that directly. Picking one aspect. What are the boundaries of this? Where does that feeling begin and end? What are the qualities of that feeling? Does it have a temperature, a texture, a tone? And continue to breathe. Continue to direct the light of awareness in this region, carried by our breath. And perhaps we can feel into the sensation. How is the heart holding? Feeling into the patterning of that holding. Without prying. Perhaps this sensation allows itself to be seen and felt. Perhaps it withdraws, freezes, puts us to sleep. If we're able, see what it's like to feel into the midst of the sensation. Noticing that there is space within it. If it is not solid, within that dynamic, even slight movement, there is space. Allow awareness to filter down into that space. Those cracks, those pores. What does it feel like from the inside? Without trying to change, get rid of any sensation, or prolong. Remain inside the coziness of some sensation. Just feel directly. And simply let go, finally, of any focus. Just allowing that heart space to pervade all around you. Within, without. Rest without focus, without fixation. Notice the quality of that resting awareness, now that we've practiced in that way. Okay. So that was my gong. So welcome again, everyone. We'll have some time to unpack that a little bit later. And today I'd like to talk about, I don't recall the exact title, but unconditional awareness and the core wound of the heart. And so there's a few different aspects there. Unconditioned awareness, which I think many of you are familiar with because this is something very central to the natural Dharma community, the traditions of Mahamudra and Dzogchen. Unconditioned awareness is the basis of that. You can call it Rigpa or Vidya awareness, maybe. You can call it ordinary mind in the Mahamudra tradition, or Semni, mind, mind nature, mind in itself. And these are all distinguished from conditioned awareness, or mind, Sem. The conceptual thinking mind, the mind that is identified with nouns, names, forms, and so forth. And to fast forward, to sort of the end of what I'd like to share, that these aspects of the conditioned and the unconditioned are form a unity. That there is a way of being and knowing that celebrates the diversity of the relative, you might say, of the conditioned aspect of existence, and is grounded in the unconditioned, right? So that's kind of the overarching theme. Now, when we can view, that interplay, whether we call it the two truths, or distinguishing consciousness from wisdom, distinguishing Rigpa from Alaya, many different ways of saying that these two things are different. What I'd like to go into today is one way that is more of a novel, in terms of Dharma. It's a pretty novel way of going about that. We're looking at, you might say, the two truths, or conditioned and unconditioned mind, through the lens of, maybe you say, developmental psychology, something that, in particular, John Welwood, who many of you may have heard of, he was a psychologist. He passed away a few years ago, but he was a student of Chogyam Trungpa originally, and more recently Tsoknyi Rinpoche. Tsoknyi Rinpoche being, a welcome teacher at Natural Dharma and Wonderwell. But he, developed a way of, integrating psychology and Dharma, which is tricky business. But of all of the different approaches, I really appreciate, what he's done very much. And he talks about something called the core wound of the heart. And there's two streams to this almost. There's the story that developmental psychology tells, and there's also the story that I told a little bit last time, if any of you were at the talk on the missing piece. The story of how, the nature of the ground of being, the ground of mind, the nature of reality as a luminous emptiness. Different ways of talking about the ground, Buddha nature, and then how that ground becomes obscured and forgets its nature. This teaching from Longchenpa, Longchen Rabjam, of one ground and two paths, that ground can be recognized or not, and then what happens then. In this case, the ground of our nature, viewed in a relational and also psychological context, is, to risk, oversimplifying, you could say, love, but to look a little bit more closely at that, it is spaciousness and also intimacy or contact or connection, right? And that spaciousness allows for connection, and that within connection there is a allowing, an unconditional aspect to that. In other words, we are not being dominated, we're not being, the contact is not something that is oppressive, it is not something that is forced, it is not something invasive. And the spaciousness, on the other hand, is not something that is ignorant, is not something that is aloof, separate, because it implicates contact, right? And so, in the best of worlds, we're born into a situation where our caregivers have that as the environment. They cultivate that. There is a sense of attunement where we are given space to grow, and we are also not left feral, to our own devices. We are connected, right? So, that's one path, right? But of course, all of us in any number of ways, either as parents or as children, fail to provide that or fail to find that, right? And so the story in this case now of the path of, you might say, forgetting or contracting or becoming more obscure, disconnecting, that path basically begins with this aspect of space being closed in some way, connection being withheld in some way. And so a lot of this is informed by attachment theory, the way that as we grow up, we learn from our primary caregivers that we are valued, that we are seen, that we are known, that we are cared for, and the opposite in moments of disruption or repeated moments of disruption, all the way up into trauma, that environment is ruptured, that connection is broken, that space is invaded, and so forth. So in response to those major and minor disruptions, we withdraw, we close ourselves down, right? Because we're not able to view our caregiver as, the source of that pain, because to us they're our whole world, and to see them as a problem would be an existential threat, basically, and our small minds can't accommodate that. So that is redirected inward, and different parts of ourselves are seen as unworthy, deficient, broken, and so forth, right? And these aspects of ourselves can then recede into unknowing. They can be exiled, they can be packed away and shipped away, and so forth. And these dimensions of self then are fractured, right, in different ways. And we start to develop a sense of self that is either exaggerated, we feel like we need to build ourselves up prematurely, unnaturally, to give ourselves security, right? Or denigrated, we have a negative self-belief, sense of shame, sense of blaming ourselves in some way, and most likely a mixture of both of those, exaggerated self-belief, denigrated self-belief, right? And then that's our ego, basically, who we are, along with all of the moments of contact, of love, of intimacy, connection, whatever genuine aspects of love there are, along with these other aspects of disconnection and so forth, come to form our story, who we are, who we know ourselves to be. And then as that develops, it's projected outward into the world that we find, and is reflected backward into our self-belief. And we start to see ourselves in the minds of others, and it develops in that way. And on the basis of that self-belief, we not only have thoughts and emotions, but also actions. And the way that we act into the world magnifies and multiplies that projection, and that projection is magnified and multiplied as it reflects back to us, and that's called our world, the world we believe, the world that we believe is an unjust world, is a broken world, is a kind world, is a beneficent world, whatever it might be, and all of these self-beliefs become projected and reflected, right? And we act on those in ways that are both creative and maladaptive, creating this cycle that builds, right? And a lot of the ways that we act are compensatory. They're means to make up for a sense of lack, right, in ourselves. Some way of compensating for what we were unable to find in terms of wholeness in our heart. And this becomes this aspect of that I'm developing here based on John Welwood, the core wound then becomes an identity and compensatory action, right? So that's very similar to what the way that that is talked about, particularly in the Mahamudra tradition, of these levels of obscuration, where there is basic ignorance, and then co-emergent ignorance arises out of that, which is the basis of duality. Then concepts that are layered onto that, forming ego, then developing out of that klesha, aspects of afflictive emotion that then motivate action, karma. So these aspects of kind of layering of delusion and the snowballing of this situation are very similar to the way that this was developed in a relational, psychological sense. So that's interesting, just to see that kind of isomorphism between these ways of seeing development. So, be that as it may, and we shut down in various ways, and then here we are. So now we're sort of arrived in adulthood, and at a certain point, if we have the opportunity, the precious human birth, as it's called in the tradition, we then have the capacity and time and space to reflect, who am I and what is this world that I am in, and how did this all happen, where did this mess start, and so forth. So then, we move into a discussion of the path, and here too, there's a very interesting parallelism between how the tradition understands the path, and how as relational, embodied psychological beings, how do we understand a path to knowing the core wound of the heart, and healing the core wound of the heart in some way. And so that's interesting. We can go into that a lot, but extensively. But just briefly, there's again a relative and absolute side to it. It's called the two accumulations: accumulating wisdom and accumulating merit, in terms of the tradition. And the ultimate way of accumulating, maybe is a kind of misleading word, but the ultimate way of fully knowing our nature is to simply rest in that nature without altering it, without trying to improve anything and trying to get rid of anything. This aspect of nature of mind meditation, something that is uncaused, and something that is, can't be manipulated, contrived in any way, right? And so there's, many of you are familiar with that, and that's sort of the overarching view, right? But then there are all of the dimensions of accumulation and purification that we enter into, to make it easier, to make our experience more transparent to the ultimate. Developing virtue, developing capacity for meditative absorption, the perfections, in other words. These are all part of that process of the path, and again, they are free of exaggeration and free of negation, right? This aspect of putting something down or exaggerating, blowing something up. We sort of walk this middle path between these. In the relational domain, and this is, I think, really crucial for us as modern Westerners, there's very unique ways of developing both the ultimate and relative dimensions of the path. So we find ourselves, in this position where we may or may not be in touch with this aspect of woundedness, this core wound. And inevitably, most likely, we tend to fall in love with others who may or may not be aware of their core wound. And yet somehow there is an attraction there, and there is a chink in that cavern that something passes through, and there is a resonance. And so intimate relationship, and this is also one of John Welwood's kind of specialties, the path of conscious relationship. Intimate relationship is a really important dimension of bringing awareness and healing, ideally, to that situation, our relative condition. And it's a very bumpy road, right? It's not that we are finding the perfect match who will fluidly lead us out of our conditioned prison into the spacious and unbroken dimension of love, right? But momentarily, maybe, right? And so that gives us hope, but it can also create addiction. So it's a practice, right? It's a path, and we have to develop that path with discrimination and presence of awareness and so forth. And again, there's not time to go into that, but that's a whole dimension of how we can, and it's not necessarily intimate relationship, but it's also can be sangha, how being in relationship with others, this relational truth and relative dimension can come to know itself more fully and heal itself more deeply, right? And then another aspect is, which is really relevant for me, parenting, because that's how this whole thing both got started and gets perpetuated and so forth. How do we as parents, through knowing our nature, our genuine nature more deeply, more purely, how do we mirror that for our children? How do we allow that spacious warmth to be what's called a holding environment? This is from Winnicott. It's a British physician and psychologist in a sense. What is it that our children need? They need this spaciousness for their own nature to come out, to blossom, to fruit, bring fruition. And they also they need contact. They need a sense of attunement, of being seen, of being known, and in an unconditional way, where it's not, our attention is not leveraged by some sort of expectation, right? So that's crucial, and that our failure in that and our success in that, and again, it's a path. It's something that we sort of stumble along and around. But we continually bring the intention of bodhicitta, of this wish for awakening for ourselves and for our children and for those we're connected to. And that allows this to become a path. And then our children very much reflect back to us as well, showing us how we're hung up, what we're stuck on, how we are closed down, what we are unaware of, and so forth, just as in intimate relationship. And in both of these cases, that conditioned aspect is highlighted, the rough spots, the unresolved aspects, the rigidity and so forth, also the chaos, what is sort of needing integration and so forth. So all of these are mirrored, but also there are moments when a window opens to the unconditioned, and that as we progress more and more, the conditioned becomes more transparent to the unconditioned. The more that we actually attend to the core wound, know it fully, bring a kindness and awareness to that for ourselves, for those that we're connected to, the more that these encounters then present themselves as doorways or transparent windows to allow the light of unconditioned awareness to shine through. And in that sense, they're a real gift. And it's not to say that the path is all about smoothing over or clearing away, purifying in that sense, getting rid of all of these hang-ups, of our personality, or all of the, the painful, the sore spots and so forth. But rather, it's that in becoming more fully aware of them, they're not denied, they're not transcended, they're not blown away in some sense, but in their very brokenness, in their very sensitivity, in their very incompleteness, imperfection, that brokenness is actually how the unconditioned shines through. It's the space in which that is allowed to shine through. It's like almost like if you give a frame to an open space, you can appreciate that space more fully in some way. You can then remove the frame, and then that's another experience that's even more profound than if you hadn't done that framing and removing in the first place. We talked about that a little bit last time as well. So really, the point being, we need to honor and appreciate our shortcomings, you might say. The very feelings that we've developed of ourselves as being deficient, as being cut off and isolated, or you may say the very longing that is at the root of our core wound, or and everybody it's different, how that manifests, or the very numbness, and usually numbness is not fundamental, but whatever our heart is carrying, however it speaks, that very message is the opportunity. That very message is the ground of knowing our true nature. It's the very window through which that will shine. And so knowing that brings a sense of self-respect, but also honoring and appreciating who we are. And at a certain point, one fine day, when we encounter our true nature, when we see through our conditioned personality to our unconditioned nature, whenever that occurs, we can look back in retrospect and see that everything that has happened to us has brought us to that point, right? And that all the good and the bad were a cause for that moment of recognition, that realization. And so the good and the bad are beyond good and bad. There is a redemptive movement that occurs. There is a deep forgiveness of ourselves, a deep forgiveness of all those that have harmed us, and a sacred view, a pure view, that this whole story of incarnation and the story of multiple incarnations, this repetitive cycle, all of that is just part of the story, right? And can be seen in that light. But again, it's not to sort of whitewash or deny, the validity of our pain, the deep importance of our unique story, the injustices that we've suffered. We're not in any way denying that, but we're seeing that they are given the right support, given the right method, and given the presence of wisdom, the link with wisdom mind. All of these wounds and traumas are the very way in which not only the doorway to which we understand our nature, but then on the flip side, the very way in which we can express that nature to others. If we've suffered in a particular way and brought insight to that suffering, that language, that experience, that sense of having been there and been through that, then we can communicate that to others who are in that place. And you see this with aspects of addiction, aspects of trauma support, communities that support each other in many ways. Those who have been through it are the healers, right? And this is our calling, in a sense. How do we use the brokenness of our our wounded heart as a doorway to wisdom, and then as the very expression of that liberation, the way that we can then connect with others because of having suffered in that way, right? So in all of this, there's this very deep, and I've been kind of mixing the parallels with the psychological dimension and the dharmic dimension, and in general that those two spheres, dharma and psychology, have a troubled relationship. Generally, things are lacking wisdom, and in that sense, the psychological approach to dharma strays into a kind of repetitive healing process that will never sort of end. We just keep digging and healing and exploring, our conditioned personality to heal it more and more. But we get stuck in that process, and there isn't a view that can really see through it, right? And understand and maybe redeem it in a sense, right? But alternatively, and I think this is less common now, but maybe definitely 10 years ago, 15 years ago, this is something that John Welwood coined, the term spiritual bypassing. Well, he popularized it. So when we privilege the spiritual dimension without giving due course to psychological insight, we can avoid developing in various ways. We can avoid dealing with unresolved psychological issues, and then these get carried along on our spiritual path in various ways. And so, spiritual bypassing is a very well-known cul-de-sac of spiritual life these days. So I don't need to get into it so much, but there's a very famous quote by Nagarjuna, who's an Indian philosopher of, progenitor of the middle way, Madhyamaka, and he says that without giving importance to the relative, the significance of the ultimate can't be taught, and without understanding the ultimate, the liberation is not achieved. Without understanding the significance of the ultimate dimension, there is no liberation. And we see this as well in psychology, what I just explained. If we get stuck in the relative, there's no liberation, right? But if we deny the relative, then we get stuck in this kind of false spaciousness, false awareness that is inert, unable to be communicated, that is, conditioned by spiritual bypassing and so forth. So, it's really important to keep in mind, and that the integration of these two, again, as where we started, that the conditioned and the unconditioned, first we separate them to know them fully in their own terms, and then there is an integration, understanding that they are non-dual. And the very statements that our wounds are the way that wisdom manifests, that's a very deeply non-dual statement, and that's reflected in different teachings on how samsara and nirvana are interdependent in some way, are seen as a unity, and so forth. So all of this then very much translates into how we can then benefit others. How do we bring this wisdom into the world? And there's another quote by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche saying that he's talking about warriorship, the spiritual warrior, and that if we if we don't bring a sense of vulnerability and brokenheartedness into our warriorship, our bodhisattva conduct, then it's untrustworthy. If there isn't this, if the warrior doesn't have a broken heart, if there isn't this sense of vulnerability, sensitivity, and brokenness, then our capacity to benefit others is generally being hijacked by an ulterior motive, right? It's not genuine. It's very suspect, right? But conversely, if we're able to approach others and the world from that place, not denying this core wound, our own vulnerability, our own brokenness in a sense, then the act that we bring, the insight that we bring, and the benefit is not only trustworthy but truly beneficial, sustainably beneficial, and so forth. So I think that's really the most important point in all of this, is that, circling back to where we began with the guided meditation, that when we direct our mind to benefiting others, we have to first understand ourselves, our condition. What are we feeling? What is it like in there? How are things off and how are things okay? Just knowing that fully, and then honoring ourselves, benefiting ourselves in some way, and bringing about some degree of healing there. And then that allows us, to the extent that we've done that work, allows us to benefit others, right? And this is just on the relative dimension. And then knowing our own nature beyond the relative condition then allows us to nurture and unfold the true nature of others, and awakening all beings, which is this aspect of the bodhisattva vow. So all of this, comes back on itself in that way. So I think that's good for now. And invite any of you to ask, or if there's anything you want to share about that initial meditation, either just directly, experientially, what was it like to breathe with the heart, or simply to move the body and embody in that way, or again, anything that what I've just shared brings to mind. So Lucy, and then Judy.
Thank you, Lama Karma. Thank you so much. This teaching really touches me tonight. And I think the place that I'm in right now, where a family in my community suffered great loss, and our whole community has, just in the last 6 days ago. So I've been in touch with many friends, and just processing and doing what I can, and very much it does, realizing that it's always coming and reminding me to be gentle with myself too. And so anyway, I'm really kind of hard for me to even speak about it, but your teaching was just really helpful to me. Feels like it came through clearly, and there was a lot there, and I just so appreciate it.
Okay, thanks for sharing, Lucy.
Yeah. Also, I just want to say thank you also from in behalf of Natural Dharma and all of us. It's so special that we can gather like this and support one another and ourselves. And I'm going to put the donation information in the chat if anyone is able or interested to donate to Natural Dharma to keep our wonderful organization going and support teachers too. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. So Judy.
you very much for tonight. And your words about parenting made me aware of something. And when you were talking about keeping that window of unconditionality open to your child, it made me realize that it's a two-way window, and that young children especially epitomize, embody, or remember, whatever word you want to use, unconditionality. They haven't learned that conditionality. And I also became aware that young children, particularly nonverbal, but probably early verbal, embody awareness also because they haven't learned the stories that we've learned that pull us away from awareness. They just don't know they are. And so maybe the role of the parent also becomes to somehow facilitate them not developing these stories early on. Because my experience with my kids, at least, is that the first stories they absorb are mine. So if I can also transmit storylessness or my state of resting in awareness, if I was to redo my three children's earliest years, I would throw out Dr. Spock and everybody else and simply rest in awareness with them, and do that when I was nursing, do that when I was with them, and simply let that resting in awareness kind of merge with what they know, what they've what they've come factory equipped with from wherever they've been before they arrived. So this was a very gentle, helpful awareness, which I suspect can also take place with adults, but it's harder because the stories are present. But true storylessness resides with the nonverbal child, and before they even learn that there's a story called Dada and Mama and everything else they get so rewarded for their first words. So thank you very much. This has been enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Yeah, and it reminds me of another point that, you know, when a child comes into a body, you know, incarnates in that way, you know, there's a process of embodiment and enworldment. You know, there's a cycle that develops, and everyone's coming in, you know, at least from the Buddhist point of view, with their own karma, you would say, and that the time of birth is very much like the time of death, in that there's an opportunity, there's a momentary shedding of the kind of chains of conditioning, right? And so whether it's at the time of death or when we come into a new life, there is a window, right? A freshness there. And yet, that freshness is very much also informed by what we're carrying, and children carry. It just takes a little bit longer for that karma to start bouncing off of their world and becoming embodied more and more. And so, in other words, what we come in with, although we have this window, this fresh start, the parents that we are with, the socioeconomic realities that we are embedded in, you know, the world that we find is a pattern reflection of our own karma. And so our parents, our environment, our holding environment, will reflect our own capacity for wisdom and merit. And so if if we've cultivated just as the same as at the time of death, if we've cultivated wisdom, we will go into the dying process without any fear, without any kind of apprehension. If we have cultivated wisdom, we find ourselves in a new world, a new body in which that wisdom is honored. There is spaciousness there. There isn't, there aren't these, like what you were saying, stories that are imposed upon us as much, right? But again, it's always mixed, because we need those stories, we need those shortcomings in order to be inspired to grow beyond them, in a sense. So it's always, it's kind of this mixed bag. But for sure, at that moment, we have this opportunity to develop greater freedom. And so whether as educators or as parents, it's our duty to catch that and nurture that, and really say, okay, even though they have the karma that will develop, the sense of fixation and solidity, reality, habit, all of that, let's try to prolong this and really unfold it, so that children's minds both remain innocent in a way, but also resilient, right? So that there's a sense of wonder that doesn't get shut down prematurely, but also a sense of of being able to, of strength, of being able to meet the shortcomings of life and the slings and arrows, so to speak, right? And that those become an opportunity for growth and awakening as well. So yeah, I totally hear what you're saying, and that's that's the trick, right? Oh, great, thank you. Is there anybody else? Yeah, Judith?
Hi, thank you, Lama Kama. I really appreciated your talk. It's really affirming and encouraging for me. I work in the field of psychotherapy, and the holidays are so hard for me. And just this morning, I was thinking how my own pain and path is really the ground of whatever compassion I have to bring to my work. And it was just amazing to hear you say that at a time where I really needed to hear it too. And it was so helpful to hear you talk about John Welwood, who was a big influence in my own learning. And during the meditation, I flashed on one of his books that I was reading in my hammock about 10, 12, I don't know how many years ago. And it was talking about looking into the heart and the spaciousness of the heart. And it was a concept I'd never heard before. And it opened my whole world up. And I discovered how clenched, how subtly my heart was clenched, trying to ward off everything. And in his work, it was, I remember, maybe I put it in my own words, but that the heart is meant to hold everything, not ward it off. But my default position tends to go into this clench, and I have to remember to go back into the heart. And then I try to offer that out, but I'm constantly struggling over my own wounds myself a lot in my life. And so I thank you so much for this so important discussion.
Thanks, Judith. Yeah, that's it. I think the way that I was working with the heart is mostly informed by Reggie Ray, the way that he does the somatic heart work. But I do remember also in John Welwood's, I think it's Perfect Love and Perfect Relationships, that he has a few meditations in there, exploring that space as well. So if anyone, if that was sparked anything for anyone, you can look in those directions. And anyone have any experiences with that initial meditation? What was it like to breathe with the heart? Is that strange? Did you have a sense of it, or could you not get a handle, like was it not accessible in some way? And that's informative in itself. How we are unable to feel. Right? It can be really important information as well. Or anything. What was it like? Or even just right now, if you can feel it. It can be a really helpful ongoing integration practice as well. You don't need to be sitting down in a closed room on your cushion with the candles and incense and all the rest. Like, you can simply breathe into your heart at any moment, doing whatever you're doing, and it's profoundly beneficial, right? Because not only does it give you a sense of what's going on, it can also provide an opportunity to see through. So it's something I encourage you to do in whenever, wherever.
So Lama Karma, I had a very interesting experience with the meditation that I have some physical trouble on the left side of my shoulder, my upper thorax there. And what I felt it as was in my heart, and as I sat with it, I started to see that they're not the same thing, that there is something with the heart, but there's also parts that are just body, and confusing them can also, present issues where you suddenly think I'm closed down when in fact I'm uncomfortable physically, and I can still be open with my heart. So it was very interesting because the right side of my heart was so wide open, and then the left side felt very constricted, and maybe there was some constriction and then some physical, and it sort of, I suddenly felt that there was actual space around it, that the heart could be as big as it wanted to be, and the body could be whatever it is. So I really appreciated the meditation.
Yeah, thanks, Elise. Yeah, and that's something, another dimension of working with chronic pain. Just the mindfulness approach in itself is helpful to notice that there is the pain, and then there is the tensing up around the pain. But also, with what you shared, also interesting to notice that there's the pain, and then there's the tensing around the pain, but also how that tensing is transported to the kind of center of holding, and how that core holding is not necessary. It's just in response to this constant thing that's happening, and we unconsciously tighten around it, right? But it's totally not immediate. It's just something that's added because we're not aware, right? And so in bringing awareness, we can actually help ourselves quite deeply, right? Great. Jennifer?
Today, there was something that came up, and I think it relates to what you're talking about, relative and ultimate. And what kept on, it seems like, in a loop in my thoughts, was to find oneself, you must lose yourself. In order to lose yourself, you must find yourself. And so I was thinking that it had to do with what you were talking about, relative and ultimate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That they're really one and the same, and you just drop the identification.
Yeah, yeah. Well, first knowing, and I think that's echoing your quote. Really thoroughly knowing our conditioned situation. How, even somatically, what is it like in that space? What is sharp? What is on edge? What is longing? These different aspects. Knowing that, first of all, is the first step, because if we are unaware of what our relative condition is, it just keeps happening in the background and sabotaging us in various ways. So really knowing the conditioned self, then that being a doorway to the unconditioned, right? And then that being the source of expressing ourselves in the relative world. So yeah, I think that resonates. Good. Anyone else before we close? Especially just like bare sensation, what was that like? Because all of this is very much grounded in, it can be grounded in the immediacy of our experience, right? And that's really the point. It's not just theory. Yeah, Annie? Annie, you're muted. If I can't see you, but you're also muted.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
So, I felt like I was holding a baby bird.
Okay. That's great.
That's what my heart
Mm-hmm.
felt like, and it was grateful for the stroking of my breath.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was a very comforting sensation. Thank you for it.
Nice, yeah. And then, exploring that, what is it like from different sides, different angles, exploring that in that way can be really helpful too. Okay. Oh, thanks, Hilda, yeah. So we can do the dedication now. So just thinking and feeling, may the pure, brilliant sun of bodhicitta dawn in each and every heart and mind, dispelling the darkness of suffering and confusion, unstoppably, until all are fully illumined and awakened.